Hi, I'm Julie Tam, managing broker of LYN Realty in Houston, and thank you for joining me for Smarter Real Estate weekly on Wednesdays. Now, normally I talk about upbeat, exciting, interesting topics, and this week's topic is no less interesting, but it's not exciting. It's definitely a little more solemn, but it's important, and it's something that we all face, so it is critical to talk about, which is death and real estate. What happens when a tenant dies? What happens when a landlord dies? We're specifically talking about those two scenarios today as it relates to property management. And of course, if you are living in a home that you're renting, if you own a home that you're renting to someone else, and the different scenarios that may happen. Now, I do want to give you a disclaimer, which is that I'm not an attorney, I'm a real estate broker. So I'm coming at this from a real estate perspective and how we handle things, but an attorney is going to factor in when there are special situations that can get more complicated. So we all know that during the COVID-19 pandemic, we've seen obviously an uptick in deaths. We have seen this ourselves at LYN Realty. We manage more than 300 rental properties, which are investment properties for our landlords. Our landlords live all over the country, all over the world, in fact. And then our tenants are in the greater Houston area. We manage in town and all the way to the far reaches of the outer suburbs of Houston and even the exurbs of Houston. And so we've really seen a lot. And I will tell you that what we have seen is there has been an uptick in the number of deaths as they have affected our tenants and also our landlords during this pandemic. People are not necessarily dying of COVID, but certainly the stress that we've all felt during this pandemic has affected us. And for those who have pre-existing health conditions, it can be exacerbated by the increased stress, and so would lead to death, sooner and more frequently than we saw before the pandemic, unfortunately. And so we take this moment to give our sympathies and condolences to those we've lost. We've lost a few tenants and we've lost a few landlords. And it has really saddened us as we've seen that happen. And we hope it will, slow down and that we don't see anymore. But in light of that, we wanted to share some helpful information to you if you are facing this situation with your own family or investment properties that you may be involved in, whether on the landlord or tenant side. So I first want to bring up on the landlord side. So whenever you have a landlord pass away, then there's going to be an heir to that property. If it's a husband and wife situation, for example, and the surviving spouse gets the property, or if the landlord is, say, a single person or somehow bequeathing the property to someone else through a will, or perhaps they don't have a will. And so therefore, that estate is going to have to go through probate, an attorney may be involved. And so we defer to the attorney and, whatever the law is as to who gets that property, or if the estate gets the property first before it goes to a specific person. And then we send the form to our tenants indicating a change of the landlord name. The lease terms don't change. That doesn't affect the tenant. It just passes on to whomever the heir is of the property. In the case of a tenant death, there are two general scenarios that can happen. One is that the tenant is living with one or more other tenants. And when I say tenant, I mean the named tenants in the lease. So occupants don't count. Occupants would be people potentially that could be under 18, that responsibility would not fall onto them. But if you have multiple tenants and one of them dies, then the rest of the tenants would assume the lease and things would go on as usual. If you have another scenario where there's a single tenant and there are no other named tenants on the lease, then what could happen is the people that are taking care of the estate, for example, the heirs or other people responsible for being the executors of that will, would then take over and make some decisions. They would help to clear out the home of the deceased tenant's property, for example, their belongings. And then also they could provide us with a minimum of 30-day notice as required by the state of Texas and in the lease. And this is actually in the Texas Property Code, I should say. You could be using, any number of leases. We have one for the Texas Association of Realtors, actually called Texas Realtors now, which is our residential lease that is most commonly used. Some people have an attorney draft a lease, and there are other forms of leases. But anyway, the Texas Property Code does say that the heirs, the living people that were not living in the property, can provide a 30-day notice to the landlord/property manager, and then we can release them from the lease with no further obligations beyond those 30 days. So that is a way that they can legally terminate the lease earlier than when the lease would have expired. And then of course that allows time for the things to be cleared out. Of course, if a tenant's heirs, relatives, friends, whoever is helping out to clear their belongings out need more time than 30 days, then certainly they would continue to pay rent to the landlord for that extra time. And typically we don't ever have a problem with that when a tenant needs to stay in a property longer, or when the tenant's, heirs, friends, etc., need to occupy that property longer just for the sake of clearing out and cleaning out and things like that. So we've definitely encountered these scenarios before in our business. If you have any general questions, you can feel free to ask. But again, because I'm not an attorney, I can't give you legal advice that's specific to your case. But I hope this was helpful, and take care, and just stay safe out there and try to reduce your stress level if you can. If you have any other questions, comments, or suggestions for future episodes, please don't hesitate to send me a message or to comment. And I do hope you will like and subscribe so you don't miss an episode of Smarter Real Estate weekly on Wednesdays. And I wish you a wonderful week. Bye-bye.